Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I never imagined that a single decision could change the entire rhythm of my life. I thought I knew where my heart belonged. I thought I had everything figured out. But then came a night when emotions and timing collided, and suddenly, the boundaries I once believed were unshakable began to blur. It all started in the quiet of an ordinary evening, one that was never meant to become extraordinary. Yet, somewhere between conversation and connection, between loneliness and desire, I found myself in a situation that I couldn't easily explain or undo. The story you're about to hear isn't just about a single mistake or a fleeting moment of weakness. It's about love, betrayal, temptation, and the complicated layers of human connection. It's about how the heart can lead you somewhere your mind tells you not to go. And it's about the consequences of giving in, even for just one night, when emotions run deeper than you ever intended. At the center of the story is a woman, caught between her role as a partner and her unexpected feelings that developed in the most unlikely place. Alongside her is a young man, grown, independent, and with a spirit that both challenged and comforted her. He wasn't supposed to become part of her personal life in this way. He wasn't supposed to look at her with that intensity in his eyes, or to understand her silences better than anyone else. But life has a way of placing us in situations where temptation feels impossible to resist. The connection they shared didn't happen overnight. It started with small moments, like conversations that lingered long after they ended, or glances that held more meaning than they should have. She would tell herself it was harmless, that it was nothing more than friendship, maybe just loneliness making her see more than what was really there. But deep down, she knew the line was being crossed, slowly and quietly. When the night finally came that pushed them past that invisible barrier, it wasn't planned. It wasn't something either of them had spoken about or admitted out loud. It was simply a moment where emotions and vulnerability collided. The warmth of his presence, the way he listened to her as if every word mattered, the way he reached out when she felt most unseen, it all built into a storm she could no longer control. The sound of that voice outside the door changed everything. It was a simple call, just a few words, but in that instant the atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Her heart pounded against her chest as if it wanted to escape, and she realized how fragile the moment truly was. What they thought was private, what they thought no one would ever notice, suddenly felt like it was on the edge of being exposed. She froze, holding her breath, while he looked at her with the same wide-eyed fear. They both knew this was dangerous, but neither of them could deny how they had gotten here. To understand why she ended up in this position, you have to go back a little. She wasn't a reckless person. She wasn't someone who searched for trouble or played with people's hearts. She was a woman who had once believed in promises, in loyalty, in the kind of love that lasts a lifetime. But time has a way of changing people. Years of being in a relationship where her feelings were often overlooked left her empty. She was surrounded by routine, conversations that no longer had depth, and nights that felt colder than they should. That was when he entered her life in a different way. She had known him for years, but as time passed, she began to notice details she never had before. The way he carried himself with confidence, the way he laughed with such honesty, and how he noticed when something was wrong with her. He asked questions no one else bothered to ask, and when she spoke, he listened without distraction. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. At first, she resisted those feelings. She reminded herself that this was not a path she could walk. But it's hard to fight what feels natural. The moments grew longer, the smiles lingered, and slowly, the walls she had built to protect her heart began to crack. She would catch herself thinking about him at odd hours, replaying conversations, remembering the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. It felt wrong, but at the same time, it gave her a sense of life she thought she had lost forever. One evening, they found themselves alone, the air filled with unspoken tension. The conversation had started casually, about everyday things, but gradually it turned deeper, more personal. She shared pieces of herself she hadn't revealed to anyone else, and in return, he opened up to her with the same vulnerability. It was in that exchange of truths that something shifted. The room seemed smaller, the silence more intimate, and, before they realized it, the line they had promised themselves not to cross was already gone. Now, standing in the shadow of what they had done, with that voice echoing faintly from the hallway, reality began to sink in. This was no longer a harmless secret. Someone had heard something, someone was closer than they thought, and the risk of everything unraveling was very real. She looked into his eyes, searching for answers, but all she saw was the same uncertainty she felt in her own chest. The weight of guilt began to mix with the undeniable pull of attraction. Every second stretched endlessly. Every sound from outside the room felt louder than it should. Were they caught? Did that voice know? Or was it just coincidence, a moment of timing that nearly gave them away? She tried to steady her breathing, but her thoughts raced. How had she let herself get this far? How had she allowed her emotions to overpower the life she had carefully built? And yet, beneath all the fear, she couldn't ignore one truth. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The question now was simple but terrifying. Was this the start of something she could never control, or would this night remain a secret memory that haunted her forever? The silence after that voice faded felt heavier than anything she had ever experienced. It lingered in the air, wrapping around them both like a secret too fragile to break. She wanted to speak, to ask what they should do, but the words wouldn't come. His hand reached for hers, a quiet reassurance that he was still there, that they were in this together, but even that touch carried the weight of uncertainty. Neither of them knew if the world outside that door had already changed forever. As she sat there, her thoughts wandered back to how things had spiraled so quickly. It wasn't only about the attraction they had tried so hard to ignore, it was about everything that had led up to this moment. Her partner, the man she had once believed would always be her safe place, had grown distant. He was present, yes, but not truly there. Conversations turned into short exchanges, evenings were spent in silence, and affection had become something rare. She had told herself it was just a phase, but the years stretched on, and the gap between them only widened. In that emptiness, she had found comfort in someone unexpected. He was younger, but maturity radiated from him in a way that surprised her. He seemed to understand the loneliness she carried without her ever needing to explain. Their bond had been subtle at first, but what began as companionship slowly turned into something unspoken yet undeniable. Each shared glance became harder to dismiss, each accidental touch lingered longer, and every late-night conversation dug deeper into emotions she thought she had buried long ago. But the conflict now was greater than her own heart. She was trapped between the life she had promised to maintain and the forbidden connection that pulled her closer with every moment. She wondered if what she was doing was selfish, or if it was simply human to crave warmth, to want to be seen, to long for a kind of love that reminded her she was still alive. For him, the situation was no easier. He knew the risk, knew how complicated it was, but his feelings weren't something he could hide anymore. There were moments when he looked at her as if she was the only person in the world who mattered, and those looks shook her to her core. What was once a passing thought had become a storm neither of them could stop. And then there was the voice, the interruption that changed everything. Was it just coincidence, or did it mean their secret was already slipping into the open? She couldn't shake the thought of what might happen if the truth came out. The betrayal would cut deep, trust would be broken, and lives would be shattered. Yet, even with those fears, her heart betrayed her with one cruel reminder: she didn't regret what had happened. Not in the way she thought she would. Now, every sound in the house felt sharper, every movement heavier. She tried to act normal when she stepped out later, tried to mask the storm inside her, but she couldn't shake the thought that someone had seen through her. Was the voice outside curious, suspicious, or simply innocent? She didn't know. But the not knowing was enough to keep her on edge. The tension between them only grew in the days that followed. Every time their eyes met across a room, it carried a weight that threatened to give them away. Every smile had to be disguised as casual, every conversation cut short before it seemed too personal. Yet, the distance only fueled the fire. They both knew the pull was still there, stronger than ever. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope. Every step was careful, every word measured, and every look carried more meaning than it should. She tried to return to normal, to act as if nothing had changed, but deep inside she knew everything had. The memory of that night clung to her like a shadow, reminding her of the risk they had taken and the danger of being discovered. And still, the pull between them only grew stronger. She found herself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, catching her breath whenever he entered the room, pretending not to notice when his eyes lingered on her a little too long. The air between them was alive with unspoken words, heavy with a tension neither of them dared to release. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. The voice that had broken their moment still haunted her. She replayed it in her mind over and over, wondering if it was simply chance or if suspicion had already begun to form. Each time her partner spoke casually, each time he carried on as if nothing was wrong, she couldn't help but search his face for hidden clues. Did he know? Was he pretending not to? Or was the silence simply too good to last? One evening, when the house was quieter than usual, they crossed paths again in the kitchen. It was late, the kind of hour when secrets feel safer, but the moment their eyes met, she realized just how dangerous their closeness had become. His hand brushed against hers as he passed her a glass, and the smallest touch was enough to make her heart race. Neither of them spoke, but in that silence, everything was said. Later that night, as she lay awake in bed, she heard footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, moving past her door. She held her breath, every muscle tense, as if waiting for something to happen. The sound stopped, lingered, then faded away. But the unease stayed with her, gnawing at her thoughts. Was it him, restless and unable to sleep? Or was it someone else, listening, waiting, connecting pieces of a puzzle that should never be solved? The suspense became unbearable. Every conversation with her partner felt like a test, every question laced with a double meaning. She found herself second-guessing even the smallest interactions. The walls of her carefully built life seemed thinner now, fragile enough that one careless word could bring it all crashing down. And yet, even as fear tightened its grip, her heart betrayed her with longing. The connection she felt with him hadn't weakened, it had only deepened. It was as if the danger itself made their bond stronger, like two souls clinging to each other in the middle of a storm. She knew a breaking point was coming. Secrets could only stay hidden for so long. Every glance, every whisper, every stolen moment was leading them closer to an inevitable clash between desire and reality. The question wasn't if everything would come to light, it was when. The breaking point arrived sooner than she expected, but not in the way she feared. One evening, after a long day that left the house unusually quiet, she noticed her phone light up with a message that froze her in place. It wasn't from him, it was from an unknown number. The message was short, only a few words, but enough to make her heart race. "I know what you're hiding." Her first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't about her. Maybe it was a mistake. But as she stared at the glowing screen, dread spread through her chest. Who could have sent it? Did someone see them that night? Was it the same voice that had called out in the hallway? She quickly tucked her phone away, forcing herself to act normal, but every passing minute made her skin crawl with unease. When she finally saw him again, she couldn't hold back the panic. She pulled him aside, her voice trembling as she told him about the message. His face went pale, and for the first time since all of this began, she saw real fear in his eyes. He tried to reassure her, saying it could be a prank or someone fishing for a reaction, but she knew deep down that someone had discovered their secret. The tension between them, already stretched thin, now became unbearable. Every sound outside the door felt suspicious. Every stranger's glance felt like judgment. And in the middle of that storm, she realized something else. Her partner had started asking questions. Little things at first, casual remarks that seemed harmless, but his tone carried a weight she couldn't ignore. It was as though he sensed the shift in the air, the unspoken current running beneath the surface. But the real twist came a few nights later. She overheard a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. From the other side of the wall, voices carried just enough for her to catch fragments. Her partner was speaking quietly, almost guarded, to someone she couldn't immediately place. What struck her wasn't the words themselves, but the tone, calm, cautious, as if he too was keeping a secret. That realization hit her harder than she expected. Had he known all along? Was he pretending not to? Or was he hiding something of his own? The thought unsettled her deeply. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about her choices or the connection she had tried so hard to resist. There was another layer, another game being played beneath the surface. When she finally confronted him in casual conversation, testing the waters, he brushed her off with a smile that felt too forced. It was the kind of smile that said more than words ever could. Something wasn't right, and she knew it. For the first time, she began to wonder if the betrayal in this house wasn't one-sided after all. That suspicion only complicated her feelings further. If he had secrets of his own, did it change what she had done? Did it make her less guilty, or did it only add more fire to a situation already spiraling out of control? The days grew heavier, filled with silence that screamed louder than any argument. She tried to focus, to stay calm, but inside she was unraveling. She felt torn between fear of exposure and the strange relief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one living in shadows. The stakes had never been higher. It was no longer just about desire or secrecy. It was about survival, about protecting herself from a truth that threatened to destroy everything. The truth finally came crashing down on a night that began like any other. The house was quiet, the air heavy with the kind of tension that had been building for weeks. She sat in the living room, phone in hand, staring at the last anonymous message she had received. "It's time to tell him, or I will." Her stomach churned. Whoever was sending these messages was no longer just taunting, they were threatening. Before she could think of what to do, the sound of the front door opening startled her. Her partner walked in, his expression unreadable, his movements steady but deliberate. He didn't greet her like he normally did. Instead, he placed his keys on the table and sat across from her. The silence between them stretched unbearably until he finally spoke. "I know," he said quietly. Her breath caught. There it was, the moment she had been dreading. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. His calmness was worse than anger. He explained how he had noticed the changes, the late-night conversations, the stolen glances, the way she seemed alive in a way she hadn't been with him in years. At first, he told himself it was nothing, but deep down he knew. And the night he had heard her voice through the door confirmed everything. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to speak, but he held up his hand. "You don't need to explain. I just need the truth." The room spun with the weight of his words. She confessed, haltingly, admitting to the connection she had tried to resist, but ultimately couldn't. She braced herself for anger, for accusations, for the ending of everything they had built. But instead, his voice cracked with something else entirely: resignation. "I've been keeping something too," he said after a long pause. That was when the second twist shattered her completely. He revealed that he had also been distant because his own heart had strayed. Someone at work had filled the void she had left behind, and though it had never gone as far as hers, the betrayal was still there. The weight of their secrets collided in that moment, leaving the room colder than ever. What was left of their marriage was no longer trust. It was fragments of two people who had lost each other long before anyone else entered the picture. The climax wasn't shouting or blame. It was the quiet acceptance that neither of them could go back. But just as she thought the worst was over, her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message appeared. "This isn't finished. Someone else knows." Her eyes widened as she realized the danger wasn't just between them anymore. Someone on the outside still held the power to unravel what little remained of their lives. And with that final twist, the story left her staring into the unknown, torn between fear of exposure and the haunting question of who else had been watching all along. In the days that followed, the weight of the truth settled heavily on the house. The messages had forced their secrets into the open, and although painful, it was a strange relief not to be hiding anymore. She and her partner spoke honestly for the first time in years, admitting how far apart they had drifted, how long they had been living like strangers under the same roof. There were no more pretenses, no more disguises, only the harsh but liberating truth. She never discovered exactly who had sent those anonymous texts, but she began to suspect it wasn't a stranger at all. Maybe it was someone inside the house, someone who had been closer than she ever realized. The memory of that first voice outside the door echoed back into her mind, and a quiet realization sank in. Sometimes the people closest to us see more than we think. Whether it was chance or intention, she never asked directly. Some answers, she realized, would only make things worse. Her relationship with him, the one she had risked everything for, faded quietly after the climax of it all. It wasn't because the feelings weren't real, but because they were too heavy, too complicated to survive outside the shadows where they began. What had felt like freedom turned into something fragile once exposed to the light. They both knew it couldn't last, and with time, their paths diverged. With her partner, things didn't heal overnight. Trust once broken doesn't return so easily. But what did change was the silence between them. They started speaking honestly, not only about what had gone wrong, but about who they had become over the years. The marriage didn't end in shouting, nor did it return to what it once was. It found a different kind of closure, two people realizing that sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes letting go is the kindest thing you can do. Looking back, she understood that the story wasn't only about infidelity or forbidden romance. It was about loneliness, about the human need to feel seen, and the mistakes we make when our hearts feel abandoned. It was about how secrets can bind people together, but also tear them apart once the truth surfaces. And that final anonymous message, "This isn't finished. Someone else knows," remained etched in her memory. It was never followed up, never explained, but in a way, that uncertainty became part of the lesson. Life doesn't always give us perfect answers. Sometimes it leaves us with questions that remind us of the weight of our choices. The story closed not with triumph, but with reflection. She learned that the heart is unpredictable, that passion without boundaries can burn everything in its path, and that every decision leaves a mark. The cost of secrets was high, but the clarity they brought was something she carried forward. How did this ending make you feel? Do you think she made the right choices, or should she have fought harder for what she felt? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to see a sequel, let me know. Your perspective might inspire the next story. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more true relationship stories, and share it with someone who loves suspenseful storytelling. Summary: a woman trapped in a distant marriage finds herself drawn into a forbidden romance that spirals into secrecy, betrayal, and shocking revelations. Anonymous messages expose the affair, but the final twist reveals that more secrets may exist within the home than she ever imagined. This is a story of passion, loneliness, betrayal, and the heavy cost of choices made in the dark.